KK. Downing is a name that stands for thunderous twin guitar riffs, the famous Flying V, and decades of dedication to Judas Priest. But after more than 40 years of making history in heavy metal, he went in a strange stillness. No goodbye, no big send-off, just questions that will never be answered. Along with Glenn Tipton and Rob Halford, Downing was one of the original members of Judas Priest. He helped turn the band from a little-known outfit into a metal juggernaut. His unmistakable mark can be seen in hits like Breaking the Law, Living After Midnight, and Painkiller. But there are problems inside that are causing problems. Downing got stronger and stronger until one day he realized he didn't belong in the band he had helped form. Why did KK become a legend? Why did Downing leave Judas Priest when the band was still at its best? Was it really his choice, or was it something that had to happen after years of fighting within the group? And most importantly, has he ever been fully recognized for all the great things he did for Judas Priest? KK Downing's life is not just the narrative of a great guitarist, it is also the story of a lonely artist who was always looking for his position in the band he helped start. Come with us as we look closely at his life, from a rebellious child in West Bromwich to a heavy metal legend, only to be thrown out by his own band. Kenneth Keith Downing Jr., sometimes known as KK, was born in 1948. Downing was born in West Bromwich, England, on October 27, 1951. Downing did not have the perfect upbringing that many other people would have had because he grew up in a working-class home. His parents, who were both workers, worked hard to sustain their family in the tough British economy after the war. His father was a rigid, old-fashioned man who didn't put up with disobedience or anything that was out of the ordinary. Kenny's mother didn't have a strong interest in music, thus she didn't encourage him to pursue any artistic goals. Downing was rebellious and unhappy with his circumstances from a young age. He hated how strict his home life was and even more so how hard the British school system was at the time. At 15, he took a brave yet hazardous choice. He quit school. Downing had no qualifications and no clear direction, so he had to find his way in a world that didn't have much room for people who didn't follow the rules. He quickly got into a crazy life full of drinking, smoking weed, and partying all the time once he left school. He worked a lot of odd jobs to make ends meet, much like a lot of young people who were into rock and roll at the time, but none of them interested him. He was getting more and more frustrated with everyday life, and in his eyes, music was the only way out. But if Downing had merely been a rebellious teenager, he might have ended up as just another lost person in England's dark industrial areas. He found peace in music. When he first heard Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, and Cream, he was blown away by how powerful and wild the electric guitar sounded. Downing met Ian Hill, a teenage bassist who also grew up in West Bromwich, in the late 1960s. They instantly became friends since they both loved music. Hill was more than just a friend. He was the one that pushed Downing to take music seriously. They talked about the concept of becoming a band, and before long, the basis for Judas Priest began to take shape. At this moment, Downing was still a teenage guitarist who didn't know much about music theory, but what set him apart was his insatiable appetite and pure willpower. He trained nonstop, getting better and better and finding his own distinctive technique, which was an aggressive, high-energy approach that would later become Judas Priest's signature sound. KK had a rough childhood and came from a poor background, but he made it through. Downing turned his anger and rebelliousness into the energy that would change his life. The hard times, the small meals, and the restless nights he spent training were all steps on his way to becoming a heavy metal icon. Downing had no idea that the trip he and Ian Hill were about to take would not only change their lives, but also change rock music forever. First job. In the beginning, Judas Priest didn't have any grandeur or flaming stages, instead, they had to fight for their lives all the time. When KK Downing and Ian Hill started the band, all they had was passion and a concept that few people were brave enough to follow. Blues rock was still the most popular type of music at the time, and heavy metal hadn't yet become its own genre. Downing, on the other hand, thought that Judas Priest could make something new, something stronger and sharper than anything else. At first, Judas Priest played wherever they could, from modest halls to local taverns. They didn't have a record deal, a professional manager, or even good gear. It became normal to play on small stages with bad sound equipment and few people in the audience. Downing didn't let that get him down, he regarded it as a challenge. A test of endurance and a chance to improve his talents while helping to define the band's style. Even though he and Ian Hill kept Judas Priest going, Downing was never happy with how things were going. He wanted the band to be louder, fiercer, and completely different from the other bands at the time, but the major problem was that Judas Priest didn't have a steady lineup. The band had a lot of different lead singers, which made it hard for Downing to fully define the band's sound the way he wanted. Rob Halford came in 1973, and everything changed. His high, forceful singing opened up a whole new world of possibilities for Judas Priest. Downing could now take the band's music to the next level because he didn't have to deal with the problems that other singers had. More speed, weight, and sharpness. There was still one important component lacking, even with Halford in place. A second guitarist who could add to Downing's sound. Glenn Tipton soon filled that gap, and with that, Judas Priest as the world would come to know it was finally taking shape. Downing, Tipton, and Halford made up the core of Judas Priest. They were the driving force that turned the band from an unknown group into heavy metal legends. Downing could finally make his idea of two guitars playing together come to life when Tipton arrived. Where both guitars not only kept the beat, but also worked together to make complicated riffs and soaring solos. This was something that had never been done in traditional blues rock before. It became one of Judas Priest's most important traits and helped them become known as pioneers of heavy metal. But even with a strong group of musicians, Judas Priest still had to deal with a hard reality. To really make it, they needed a record deal. They ultimately signed with Gull Records after years of trying, and their first album, Rock'n'Rolla, came out in 1974. For Downing, it was a big deal, but it was also a letdown. The CD didn't sound like what he had in mind. It was still too bluesy and mild compared to the music that was burning in his mind. But instead of backing down, Downing used it as incentive to move Judas Priest forward. He and Tipton started trying out a stronger, more aggressive sound with sharper riffs and faster tempos, all in preparation for their big break. Sad Wings of Destiny, the record that altered everything, came out in 1976. With songs like Victim of Changes and The Ripper, Judas Priest firmly entered the world of genuine heavy metal, leaving behind the last traces of their blues rock roots. This was no longer a band trying to find its sound. This band was ready to take over. KK was at the center of this change. Downing was the one who made Judas Priest go from being an unknown band to a storm that would shock the rock world. They weren't just another band playing in little bars anymore. They had a record deal, a sound that was all their own, and most crucially, a clear idea of what they wanted to do next. But this was just the start. Heavy metal was still a new type of music, and no one knew how far it could go. Downing didn't need to know, though. He only knew that Judas Priest was going to become a legend, and he would do anything to make it happen. The best years with Judas Priest. Sad Wings of Destiny was out in 1976, and it was when Judas Priest officially left the world of traditional blues rock bands and made a name for themselves in heavy metal. KK. With his razor-sharp riffs and powerful playing technique, Downing turned Judas Priest's sound into a weapon of destruction. But getting to the top took more than just physical strength. The band required a defined identity, a signature look, and most importantly, tunes that could define a whole genre. Judas Priest signed with Columbia Records in 1977, which marked the start of a whole new era. They were no longer an underground band with limited equipment and low-budget records, now they had the chance to reach more people. But with it came the need to develop something new and exciting that would set Judas Priest apart from all the other bands in the world. At this point, Downing had perfected his playing approach, and he and Glenn Tipton started creating songs together, trying out bolder and more aggressive concepts. There were no more limits from the past. People stopped playing blues rock and started writing songs that were sharper, faster, and stronger. In just 3 years, Judas Priest put out a series of groundbreaking albums, such as Stained Class, 1978, and Hellbent for Leather, 1979. This was the time when they not only made their sound, but also created a distinctive look. Judas Priest came out for the first time wearing black leather, studs, and an aggressively edgy look. If heavy metal still had some hard rock aspects in it earlier, they were the ones that changed it into something completely different. KK. With his long hair, famous flying V, and exciting stage persona, Downing became one of the first real heavy metal guitar heroes. But everything they had done up to 1980 was nothing compared to British Steel, which is considered one of the most important albums in metal history. By this time, Downing and Tipton, who had been writing songs for more than 10 years, had mastered the art. Songs like Breaking the Law and Living After Midnight hit the sweet spot between raw power and broad appeal. These songs weren't just for metal fanatics, they were popular with a lot of people, bringing in folks who had never heard of Judas Priest before. Heavy metal was no longer just for the underground scene, it had become a part of public culture for the first time. Judas Priest was one of the best metal bands in the world when they entered the 1980s after British Steel. This time was marked by extensive tours, full arenas, and record releases that came one after the other without any indications of slowing down. With each new record, Downing and Tipton made their twin guitar onslaught even more fluid and dynamic. Screaming for Vengeance, which came out in 1982, not only solidified their domination but also helped them become successful in business. The song You've Got Another Thing Comin' became one of the most important metal anthems of the 1980s. It made Judas Priest more popular in the US and solidified their status as one of the best-selling rock bands of the time. But Downing never let success make him lazy. He was continuously looking for methods to help Judas Priest reach new heights. If British Steel was the start of commercial heavy metal, Defenders of the Faith, 1984, brought back the weight and grit. This time, along with Turbo, 1986, and Ram It Down, 1988, showed that Judas Priest was willing to try new things. Turbo caused a lot of talk because of its glam metal tendencies that were based on synths. Ram It Down, on the other hand, made it plain that they had not forgotten their metal roots. But all of their previous work seemed like practice for Painkiller, 1990, which is largely considered one of the best heavy metal albums of all time. This was when Downing and Tipton went all out. The guitars of Painkiller were heavy like a storm. The solos never stopped, and the intensity was off the charts. There were no signs of hard rock or any other genre. This was the most intense heavy metal without any filters. But things started to go wrong just as Judas Priest was at its best. Rob Halford quit the band in 1992, leaving behind a hole that couldn't be filled. Judas Priest was never the same once Tim "Ripper" Owens left, even if the other members tried to keep going. Downing kept composing and playing, but deep inside he felt something was wrong. The real spirit of Judas Priest was the way Halford, Downing, and Tipton worked together. With one piece gone, that equilibrium was lost. Halford came back in 2003, which gave fans optimism that Judas Priest may get back to being great again. But by that time, KK had changed. Downing. Years of stress and tension inside the band, as well as pressure from management and his relationship with Glenn Tipton getting worse, made him feel that he didn't belong. Downing started to think about something he had never thought about before, leaving Judas Priest, even while the band was putting out albums and going on lucrative tours. Downing made a choice in 2011 that shocked the metal world as the band got ready for the Epitaph Tour. After more than 40 years, he quit Judas Priest. There was no last concert or performance to thank the audience. He just wrote a letter saying he wouldn't be going on tour. For a lot of people, it was a surprising departure, but for Downing, it was unavoidable. The tensions had gone on for too long, and he felt more and more undervalued in the band he had helped form. At first, Judas Priest said he departed for personal reasons, but the truth was far more complicated. Downing later said that he left because of long-standing problems with Glenn Tipton, issues with management, and a strong sense of being left out of the band he had committed his life to. Judas Priest didn't try to get him to stay this time, unlike in the past when they did. Instead, they quickly put Richie Falk in his place. A lot younger guitarist, and they didn't seem to want Downing to come back, even as a guest. Longtime supporters were furious over this choice because they wondered if Judas Priest could still be true to itself after so easily replacing one of its founding members. KK went from being a destitute youngster in West Bromwich who lived on the streets to a heavy metal legend. Downing had been through it all. Was this really the conclusion of his story, though? Or was there still another chapter that needed to be written? Life outside of work. On stage, KK. Downing was a wild, blazing guitarist who set crowds of tens of thousands on fire with his strong riffs and electric stage persona. But when he wasn't in front of the cameras, he was a very different person, shy, introverted, and a little lonely. During his best years with Judas Priest, Downing was never the type of rock star who partied too much, like a lot of his peers did. He did give in to the rock and roll lifestyle of drinking and partying at times, but it was never a long-term way of life for him. Downing never got married or had kids. The media didn't know anything about his personal life. He doesn't have any high-profile relationships or scandals like a lot of other rock stars. To him, music seemed like the only thing that would last forever. KK quit Judas Priest in 2011. After being in the band for more than 40 years, Downing thought he could finally have a calm existence. He had put a lot of money into Asbury Hall Golf Course, an ambitious project that would turn his private estate into a high-end golf resort and tourist destination. He wanted to leave a legacy beyond Judas Priest, and this was his second dream outside of music. It wasn't just a financial investment. But reality didn't match what he thought it would be. The project lost a lot of money, which caused it to get into a crisis. He had to sell Asbury Hall, a place he had worked hard on for years, because he had no other choice. To make things worse, he had to sell his rights to Judas Priest's songs, which was a terrible choice because it meant giving up not just his source of income but also the works he had committed his life to making. Downing now had to deal with a hard reality after being a legend in heavy metal. No band, no job, no money. He still had hope for a return, no matter what. Downing thought he may get back together with Judas Priest when Glenn Tipton was afflicted with Parkinson's illness. Downing felt he would be asked back to stand in for Tipton, who was unable to perform because of his health problems. But Judas Priest utterly turned him down. They elected not to invite him back and instead kept touring without him, hiring Andy Sneap to fill in for Tipton. This was a huge setback for Downing. Not only because he couldn't go back, but also because it showed that the band he had helped construct had utterly turned its back on him. He later said that this was when he knew he could never work with Judas Priest again. But Downing didn't want his career to end like this. He announced his reappearance with a new project, KK's Priest, in 2019, after being quiet for almost 10 years. A band he started with Tim "Ripper" Owens, who used to be the lead singer of Judas Priest and filled in for Halford when he was away. KK's Priest was not Judas Priest, but Downing thought it was the only way to keep his legend alive. His return caused a split among the metal scene. Some die-hard Judas Priest fans said that KK's Priest was a cheap knockoff and that it was just a nostalgia act without Halford or Tipton. But his fans perceived it in a different light. They thought it was a good way to keep the spirit of Judas Priest alive, the band he had helped start but then left. KK's Priest showed one thing: no matter if they were successful or not, KK Downing never really stopped playing heavy metal. He still took up his guitar, stood on stage, and fought for the music that had defined his whole life, even after everything he had been through. And even though Judas Priest went on without him, KK Downing wrote his own story, a fresh chapter in his life, with his own hands. Life and legacy now. KK has been into heavy metal for more than 50 years. Downing isn't ready to stop playing his guitar yet. He is now in his 70s and no longer a member of Judas Priest, yet he still plays songs with the warrior spirit of a strong guitarist. He doesn't want fame or approval from the people who turned their backs on him anymore. He plays for the love of it, for the metal that flows through his veins, something he has never been able to give up. Downing is still active with KK's Priest, the band he started to keep the spirit of genuine heavy metal alive. Downing may never have the same impact as Judas Priest, but new project means freedom and full creative control over his music for him. He put out Sermons of the Sinner in 2021, an album that is very much in the style of Judas Priest's golden age. This shows that he has never lost his ability to write and perform. KK's Priest is still on tour, and although if he doesn't play on the big stages like he used to with Judas Priest, Downing still gives it his all, just as he always did. But for the most part, he leads a tranquil life now. Downing doesn't have any other commercial projects to keep him from making music now that he has lost Asbury Hall Golf Course. He lives a quiet life, writing music, talking to his passionate followers, and going to rock concerts every now and then. But there is one thing that is true. Since he left, Judas Priest has never said he was an important component of the band. There is still a frigid gap between him and his former bandmates, which makes many fans upset because the bond should have been honored, not obliterated. No matter what, KK. There is no denying Downing's legacy. He wasn't just a member of Judas Priest, he was one of the people who helped make Judas Priest. The band's sound was defined by the famous twin guitar approach he and Glenn Tipton came up with, which set the model for heavy metal. Judas Priest could never have become as big as they did without him, and the genre itself might not have grown into the fierce, razor-sharp force it is today. His impact goes far beyond Judas Priest. He has shaped a whole generation of guitarists. Dave Mustaine, James Hetfield, Zakk Wylde, Ozzy Osbourne, Adrian Smith, and Dave Murray, all of whom play in Iron Maiden, have all been influenced by the way Downing and Tipton play. Their aggressive guitar playing was the start of modern heavy metal, especially thrash metal, which bands like Metallica, Slayer, and Megadeth would later take to new heights. Downing's stage demeanor helped shape the image of a real heavy metal guitarist, in addition to his technical skills. He held a flying V in his hands, had long hair that flowed under the stage lights, and had a characteristic headbanging stance during scorching solos. These parts established the visual definition of what a metal guitarist should look like. KK helped shape the idea of a heavy metal guitarist as we know it today. But one bad thing about his legacy is that Judas Priest's official history doesn't mention him. When the band was elected into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2022, KK. Downing was asked to come but wasn't given any special attention. Many fans were angry because they thought Judas Priest would never have been the same without him. He played a short show with his old bandmates on stage, but it was clear that he was no longer part of the band. KK Downing is still a living legend in heavy metal, even if he is no longer a member of Judas Priest. He can't be forgotten, and even if Judas Priest is moving on without him, he has left behind a legacy that will go on through KK's Priest and the impact he has had on generations of musicians. He might not have had a famous solo career like Ozzy Osbourne, and his name isn't as well known as the names of the guitarists from Metallica or Iron Maiden.